Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. If there's one political ideology that depends fundamentally upon grassroots participation, it's democracy. Giving people power over the conduct of their lives and the disposition of their resources are central tenets of democracy in action. And to the extent that developing nations seek to progress, extending the full franchise of democracy by encouraging political decisions at the local level is key. But it's also imperative that decentralizing democracy by empowering localities must involve genuine transfers of authority. If the local authorities do not gain real decision-making powers, the resultant cynicism will make claims of democratization ring hollow. Let's consider a story from Africa that makes this point in a very creative way. My guest is Jesse Ribot, Senior Associate in the Institutions and Governance Program of the World Resources Institute. Jesse, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you, George.
Jesse,
Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. I guess the first word I wanted to say to you is congratulations. Once again, you've used your very considerable artistic gifts to help us understand this whole issue of democracy, development, and Africa in a very creative way. We're going to use a video that you produced in Africa as a way of structuring our conversation. Let's go to the background first, though, before we introduce our first clip and carry on our discussion. It all revolves around the decentralization of democracy in Senegal. And as I understand it, Jesse, that began technically in 1996 with the promulgation of the first national law. What was your sense of the government's intent with that first law? What were they trying to do? What were they trying to accomplish through rural councils taking responsibility for certain environmental decisions?
There are a lot of motives for decentralizing, but I think the main motives that are of concern to me and to many people within the government in Senegal were the creation, first off, of local elected authorities, the transfer of some functions to them, such as health, education, natural resource management. There were 9 functions. In order to increase efficiency and transparency in the service delivery at the local level and in natural resource and other kinds of management.
Right.
The idea that local management might be better because people could monitor it, because it was close, because the authorities who represent those people are in fact within arm's reach.
Right. That's very well stated, and that gives us a very clear sense of the intent, Jesse. And as we both know, and the video is going to make very clear, it's a wonderful production, by the way, forest exploitation is one of the key concerns, and the film is going to center on that. In 1998, I believe the Forestry Service itself had to promulgate its own codes to conform to what the government wanted to accomplish in this area. How important to the rural councils, like the one we're going to see in action here, is this whole question of forest exploitation? What does that mean to the villages?
It means different things to different villages. Obviously, there are about a third of the villages in Senegal, roughly, find themselves in forested areas. Most of Senegal's rural areas are dependent on farming or pastoralism. There are very few alternative income generating sources available to a rural population. So forestry, forests in general, have enormous numbers of products that people can exploit. Food products that they can gather in the forest, nuts, fruits, berries, hunting, honey, fiber, wood for building houses, but also all of these products can usually be exploited and sold in the market. So they're of some importance depending on the richness of the forest in which a particular village is located, but they can be enough revenue to quadruple or even multiply by 100-fold the income of a given village if they were allowed to exploit the forest for certain timber or charcoal or other high-value uses.
So this is a very big deal indeed. So when we see the Rural Council established here, the prospect that they're going to be, in a sense, having the authority over how these are used, these resources used, is very important to them.
Absolutely.
But with that in mind, Jesse Ribot, let's turn to the first clip and see the response of the villagers when they learn this is about to happen.
Okay.
mooy nguur gi ci boppam waaw wàccee na sañ-sañ yi waaw ba ñu ci mel ni man PCR waaw léegi kalaa dugg ci àll bi naan yaa ngi gori ay garab waaw ngir dugg ci mbirum këriñ waaw faw nga jaar ci man ma defal la signature waaye déglu leen waay loolu neex na de pare gu ma ngeen yuuxu waxal dafa am lu des ndax li tubaab naan signature préalable faw ma defal la ko signature
yow mi président
yoo ko ci préalable
yow mi kalaa ñëwati di dugg ci àll bi di gor garab
waaw
ngir def ko këriñ
mu tàgg ko
fokk yow nga signé
waaw kañ
boo signé wul
du am dara da cee baax sax da cee baax
da cee
baax leer na baax
leer na nay
dafa am lu des waaw
I think anyone would just be caught up in it right from this first scene, Jesse. You can vividly see the excitement that this decision has brought to the villagers.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that scene that we've just seen, what the meaning that scene conveys to us of the power of this decision to them. And in the context of it, explain the title, Weeks, Dunks, and the quota, Plucking Local Democracy in Senegal. That's very
Okay, first let me tell you about the importance of the decentralization in this particular area where charcoal has been exploited for at least 20, if not 30 years. Up to now, charcoal production has been conducted by migrant laborers working for urban-based merchants who come to the village, install their workers cut the trees, live in the village, and they leave. And the villagers are left behind with some portion of their forest standing, but basically with very little to show for the exploitation. And they see these other people getting rich. Right. Now they're being told, you're going to be able to not only determine when and whether cutting takes place, but who can do it. And you can even do it yourself. So that's the importance of it. It's a very exciting change, and it looks very good to them. The title of the film is actually Wer Dung. And it's a Dung. And you'll notice them saying dung, dung, dung. Yeah. That's a sort of, when you say someone's last name, you repeat it as a sign of respect. But dung here means pluck. Werdung means plucked white. It's the term for a scapegoat, somebody who's blamed for everything, even if they weren't there. And that's the name of the rural council president, the elected democratic leader in this rural community. And everybody comes up to him and says, dung, dung, dung. They're kind of plucking him in one way or another as they go along.
So we're getting from the start a sense that the honorific of his title doesn't conform to the actuality of his situation.
Of his job, exactly. It's a very difficult job, and they're very vulnerable. Rural council presidents do get blamed for everything because they supposedly work on behalf of everyone.
All very helpful, Jesse. We're going to turn soon to our second clip, but I think you've already given us a lead into this, and that, of course, is the importance of this industry, which everyone thinks they're now going to control, and particularly in the sense of its ability to generate charcoal. Now, charcoal is going to be the major product of concern here. We've already seen a gentleman who's going to become very important here, who is the patron, the man who...
The man in blue.
The man in blue, who was sort of the big boss.
Yeah, he's the charcoal merchant.
Tell us a bit about the power of a charcoal merchant in Senegal, the man in blue. I mean, what kind of resources would he tend to control?
They're urban-based, wealthy merchants who give loans to woodcutters who then work in the woods, but they're also politically connected. So a charcoal merchant is someone you may be able to go to get a job in the city. You may be able to get other resources through a patron if you actually are connected through family or other ties to that particular person.
Let's see him in action here in our second clip.
Je suis à Dakar, je vis à Dakar et je reçois mon quota chaque année à Dakar. Personne ne m'a rien dit. Le reste,
yow ma ni
waaye sëñ bi nag dëgg dañu bëgg nga may ñu rek.
waaw ngeen ma may ma tontu ko.
penaar moom nga wax ñu ñoo la ko gën a def ñun ñii suñu àll bi sonnoon war a noppalu.
ñoo ko moom
ñoo la gën a penaar.
waaw
ma ne du maa yor signature.
waaw yaa ko yor.
boo siiwul
dinaa takk seen i biir. ba 2001.
waaw
kenn waroon am fukk.
waaw
am ñett.
yaay borom de signature bi
waaw
gars yi ma yeewi leen rek.
mën nañu yeewee ko.
kooku mooy xibaar bi may indi.
décentralisation bi moom.
Well, the charcoal patrons pretty much thrown a damper on the enthusiasm there. Clearly, he has a sense that he has the power to control things. Is that a given fact? I mean, the power of the business interests in a place like Senegal to control resources.
The quota he mentioned is part of the system of the management of this sector by the Forest Service for the last, since the 1980s, really. It was a quota. Before that, it was in the form of a permit. But the state hands out the quota, and they've handed them to these politically connected merchants up to now. So the merchant says, you think you're going to, make charcoal? I'm the one who has the quota. The state gives me the quota every year. So he sort of looks at this as kind of a silly bunch of villagers, and he just leaves.
Right. There's another aspect to this, too, that I found intriguing. He mentions Dakar. He mentions the capital. And I got two questions from that, Jesse. One is, first of all, Dakar is the capital, therefore is that where he still thinks power is centralized. In other words, it's nice you fellows have the sense of rural councils and all that, but we know where power really lies. And the second is just as a commercial fact, and this I think I may have gotten as well from some of your writings as from this video, that there might be a sense here, and I suppose this is the question, that the charcoal needs of Dakar in major cities have to be met first. That's the priority. Everything else is, no matter what people say, is secondary.
Yeah, Dakar is certainly the center of political power and the power over the forestry sector. And indeed, the argument that the charcoal needs of Dakar need to be met is one of the big arguments made by government officials in the line ministry, the forestry ministry, which is actually the environment ministry, to continue managing the sector. That we can't really let these local people do it because otherwise the needs won't be met in Dakar.
Well, the decision to decentralize and indeed the control of the entire industry and how it's regulated involved more than the citizens and the government. They also involve the Forestry Service. And our story, of course, progresses, and the Forestry Service obviously has to be involved in the extraction of the lumber and what's done with it. And 8 years later, we're going to get to a key point here and introduce the Forestry Service in action into our story and learn how that interaction works with the Rural Council. So let's take a look at clip number 3.
I should mention, though, that the law eliminated the quota, the law of 1998, and it should have been eliminated in 2001. And the importance of that is that that was one of the keys for actually transferring the power. You eliminate the quota, now the rural population, through the local council, can manage it.
Has the authority to manage it.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Badiane.
Président.
na nga def waay alhamdulilah toogal.
merci waay. alhamdulilah.
man de coono ma ji.
waaye yow kañ coono jàpp na la.
daanaka for naa bët.
da nga ñeme coono nag dañ la da nga noppal nag da ci baax.
60 villages.
waaw métti na nag mais nag jàmbaar nga nag.
60 villages
ñëpp a ngi coow sa njàmbaat. vraiment moom sa liggéey moom wax dëgg yàlla. alhamdulilah.
yàlla baax na.
c'est sûr.
communauté ndambar dugub bi dafa yaatu.
jàmbaar nga nag wax dëgg yàlla. bon sinon man nag dama ñëwoon xam naa xaw ma jot gi dafa xaw a néew. waaye dama indoon benn arrêté pour rek comme d'habitude. nga defal ma une petite signature. ça ñu mën a commencé waat def PDA voilà moom rek la ñuy xaar actuellement. mais nag jàmbaar nga vraiment.
Badiane kii du ma ko signé.
waa tey du ma ko.
He's going to refuse to sign this. How powerful is that? I mean, the expectation is that it's going to be a pro forma agreement, just go along, get along, and he says no.
Well, he since the promulgation of the law, he's been asked every year to sign, although he has the right not to sign and to use that as a negotiation point to get more resources for the village. But up to now, they come and they say, well, this year you can do it, and he's trusted them and he signed. This time, he's not going to sign. And by law, he could completely block production in his rural community, in the 60 villages of Nambaradugu, which means place of many problems.
Right. But that must really upset the system. I mean, this kind of, and in fact, I wanted to ask you this: are there incidents of that kind of refusal that that you knew of, that you drew upon for this film? Is that something
Yes.
that actually happened?
This film is based on one particular village, a set of interviews that I did, an area that I know fairly well, and that village was one out of 15 where we did interviews, and we found that of the rural council presidents interviewed, all but one had refused to sign at some point. And all of them, in the end, were in one way or another pushed until they signed. Now, this particular village, he held out longer than the others.
That's marvelous. We have an actual true story at the core of this.
This is based on a piece of field research.
Excellent. Why did you decide on the medium of film as a way of conveying the story?
Well, I've been working in Senegal for 20 years. And I go out, I do my research, it's on forestry policy, and I often come and I bring it back to the Forest Service, and they smile and they listen, and they hear me say, well, you know, you're not doing this and you're not doing that. And of course they know what they're doing. So we had a national policy dialogue at the end of our research program from which this came in Senegal. And at that national policy dialogue, I thought, I don't want to get up in front of this crowd and say bad, 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 bad once again. I basically thought, how can I do this some other way? And I thought, humor and irony, because the situation is so absurd that it lends itself to humor and irony. And I decided to hire a theater team to produce a play based on this particular case, because I thought it really illustrated what we were seeing in a way that showed how democracy itself was being undermined. And then we performed it at the policy dialogue, then afterwards made it into a film.
Well, congratulations, because it succeeds on every level, if I say so myself. Well, power has its resources, as we all know, Jesse, so let's see some of the reaction when things progress here, and particularly how the business interest reacts to what is being rejected here.
Je viens de chez le PCR. Wow. Il a refusé catégoriquement de signer. De signer l'arrêté. Auparavant, j'avais même envoyé le chef triage, mon dard.
Mais mon nous peut dire que de signer les arrêtés.
Non, cette fois-ci, il a refusé et je ne sais pas pourquoi mon bain. Même dafa doy waar là léegi.
Mais maman, je le connais. Non, ne vous en faites pas de souci. Il aime. Mais de toutes les manières, monsieur le grand charbonnier, de n'a pas réglé. De n'a pas réglé, à mon 20 problèmes.
Monsieur le sous-préfet, je compte sur vous.
Il n'y a aucun problème.
Oui,
c'est bon.
Mbassou!
Ok, au revoir.
Merci.
Merci bien.
Merci.
Jesse, as I watched that scene, I said, to me it appeared the crystalline moment in which we see at least the kind of the seeds of corruption set. When it just struck me as terribly evocative of how that might work in a country like Senegal.
You know, I actually don't think of it as corruption. I think of it as the consistent interests of the merchants and the actors in the state.
But he's quite willing to go to the prefect and have the rural council's action overruled.
Well, that's right, because for the merchant, it doesn't make sense to let the rural people manage something they haven't managed before. It doesn't make sense to have the merchants who, this is their job, taken away. And it also, for the sous-préfet who knows the laws, he doesn't want there to be problems, and he knows that these merchants are powerful people, and he's going to smooth things out and make sure they work.
Don't both men have to understand that the progress of democracy depends upon them accepting the decision of the rural council?
They do, but it's not intuitively obvious to somebody who's been in that position for half a lifetime or more, and for whom these changes simply are a shift away from business as usual. And the sous-préfet, he represents the law. He's the local representative of the state in the local arena. He sits in an office near the rural community. his job is supposedly just to make sure the laws are followed. But in fact, he still plays the role that he played prior to the decentralization law, which was he was the decision maker.
Let's quickly turn to the next clip because I want to contrast what we've just seen with the businessman going to the sous-préfet with now our president of the Rural Council having his audience and see what his reaction is to all of this.
Avec tout le respect que je vous dois,
Oui.
je dois dire que cette fois-ci, dinaa le décevoir parce que je n'ai pas signé l'arrêté.
Quoi? Vous avez dit... Non, je n'ai pas bien compris là.
Je ne signerai pas l'arrêté.
Verdour. Vous n'avez pas signé arrêté.
Effectivement.
Mais ce n'est pas... Bon, je crois que... Bon. Gis nga man ni ma amee obligation signée hein, pour officialiser un acte de mariage ci diggante ñaar ñu bëgg a sëy xam nga man dama am obligation pour signer pour officialiser, je me répète yow itam noonu nga war amee obligation signer bi arrêté wala déet.
I would nominate that as the most emotionally powerful of the scenes in the movie, the most heartbreaking in a way. Your sense?
Yeah. It's amazing because what he's done is the sous-préfet has taken a new right, the right of the Rural Council president to refuse to sign, and said, no, this is like signing a marriage license. He's reduced it to an obligation. So a couple comes with a marriage license, I can't tell them not to get married. I have to sign their marriage license, says the sous-préfet. Whereas, in fact, this right to sign or not to sign is clearly transferred to the sous-préfet, to the Rural Council president, in order to give him the power to make decisions over these resources that the local people depend on.
Exactly.
And so...
And in that sense, it's a lot more than signing a marriage license. I mean,
that's right. And so he's deflated. I mean, he's up against something where he makes the argument, he knows his rights, but he's just stuck.
Let's go to our next clip because pressure is going to tighten on him now, and we're going to see, and this is going to be very interesting. The Forestry Service enters into it with their piece, we're going to see, and perhaps there's some familial pressure in this too. I'm not quite sure. You help us as we watch this.
Monsieur le PCR, xam nga ni charbonnier yi ngay bañ a signer arrêté bi. Ils ont des femmes et des enfants. En plus, ils ont engagé des sourdins et des chauffeurs de camions. Te ñooñu ñëpp am na ay nit, ay famille yu yaakaar ci ñoom. Moi, je sais que vous êtes un homme généreux, un homme modeste. Et vous êtes sensible à tout ce problème. Man nag dama ñëw. Pas en tant qu'agent forestière, mais en tant qu'ami et sœur. Vous demandez de me signer cet arrêté. On se connaît. Et je sais que vous avez toujours bien fait votre travail. Je vous en prie, monsieur le PCR. Je vous remercie infiniment.
Je vous en prie.
Gis nga bis ni ki tey ëmb naa sa kersa.
Well, that's the pivotal scene, Jesse. The man signs.
He signed. And the arguments that he signs after are arguments that were made typically. They were, you know, you don't want to get a bad reputation. A lot of people depend on this industry. You're blocking other people's work. They're actually really plausible arguments.
Indeed.
But also, he knows that those people have power over him ultimately. He got on to the Rural Council because he was on a party list. He can be thrown off. So he's caught in a web of relations that are both affective, as in they're about reciprocity, they're about familiarity, but they're also political, and they are also, they have to do with his own livelihood.
Well,
and
I would
well-being.
say they are emotionally irresistible. That's what it probably also comes down
That's
to.
right. And in the real interview, it was a man who came by. There are some women in the Forest Service, but it was an older man. And the older man said, literally to him, I'm coming to you as a brother. In the name of God, please sign this document. And he did.
It's hard to resist. I think we all know now what's inevitable, but let's watch the last scene to see how things really changed in the aftermath of that signature.
amuñu ci dara lu dul njëgu guro.
kese
njëgu guro.
kese
coogo goro.
nijaay war a koon signé da ngaa waroon a compter rek bañ. waaye li kenn musu koo gis daay. te mënu fee mucc.
Mati damaa bëgg nga doxantul ma ci pàkk ginaar bi.
ñun léegi.
waaw teel soo demee.
waaw.
nga wutal ma ginaar bu jigéen.
dëgg la.
ngir yàlla war a suli bàyyil ma séq.
nijaay bàyyi naa ko.
bàyyil ma tiir ak séq.
ma ne nijaay bàyyi naa ko. waaw.
maa ngi la koy wax waaye xam naa doo ko def.
nijaay li nga wax lay def.
soo demee da ngay jël ginaar gu jigéen gi nag juutal ko.
ma juutal ko.
su diisee.
waaw.
nga xam ne nena nga ca.
dëgg la.
jëlal bu oyofee bàyyil. waay bu oyofee bàyyil.
man nijaay bu diisee rek ma jël bu oyofee ma ba fa.
boo indee. suqil ma.
waaw ba mu set.
raxasal ma.
ba mu set.
jëlal ma sobal ma ci mànd mi bàyyi nag muy bax.
muy yéen nijaay.
di bax
di bax rek.
di bax di bax di bax. nay bax
rek man sama nijaay. muy yéen 5000 francs. rien que pour une soupe.
Jesse, we're almost out of time, but give me a quick moral on this whole tale. We've seen what's happened.
He's been plucked. He's turned into the very plucked chicken that a werdon really is. And he took a small bribe, probably from the last forester he saw. That was the typical situation. Foresters gave people bribes from the forest merchants.
Come full circle. Jesse Ribot, thank you once again. You've taught us and you've entertained us. Few people do that at the same time.
Thank you very much, George.
And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue is also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching this week. Jesse Ribot, big thanks to you. That was
The Art of Conversation, Dialogue at the Woodrow Wilson Center features 20 years of dialogue, distributed by the Johns Hopkins University Press, www.press.jhu.edu.